Now, this week, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the scientific body who advise the UN on rising temperatures, released a major new report which summarises all the findings on the causes, solutions and effects of climate change revealed by them in the past 5 years. Now, the report says there is a rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres describes the report as a survival guide for humanity, warning that a climate time bomb is ticking. Strong words. But critics have said that language such as this is unhelpful and paints an unnecessarily frightening picture of the state of the world. Well, today we ask, are we too negative about our chances of saving the planet? Joining us to help answer that question are Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg from New North London Synagogue, the author of the book Not Zero, Ross Clark, the founder of Climate in Colour, Joycelyn Longdon, and Jason Reed from Young Voices UK. Great to see you all. Thanks for coming on the show. Jonathan, words like this: catastrophe, emergency, crisis, time bomb. I mean, those are the words that we use when we talk about climate change. Some would say they're not really necessary. They're hamming it up, and they're scaring people.
They are scary, but we need the truth, and the IPCC report is from hundreds of climate scientists, and it's facts with a superb executive summary calling on governments to action. But these words are extremely frightening. There is climate anxiety around, and our challenge is to turn those words of truth into hope, into action and inspiration at a local, national and international level, so that we do our best that our children, whose lives are on the line here, I think, inherit a world as beautiful and as biodiverse as we were lucky to be born into.
Yeah, I mean, Ross, we're talking about facts here, as Jonathan says. It's the truth. And look, we're seeing stuff now, aren't we? Hurricanes, droughts, heat waves and floods linked to climate change. It's the truth. You might not want to hear the truth. It's not comfortable, but it is the truth.
Well, when I listen to Antonio Guterres, I really do not recognise the IPCC report, well, certainly not the scientific report, which went into the nitty-gritty of what's happening and what's not happening. It's very measured, it's got lots of trends and counter-trends. Nobody listening to Guterres, for example, would guess that there's no increase in landfalling hurricanes in the US in the past 200 years, or that the number of deaths from the heat around the world is exceeded 9 times over by deaths from the cold, and there's actually a net decrease in global deaths from extreme temperatures as climate changes.
And what about Jonathan's point? Kids' lives are at risk. I mean, it doesn't affect you and I. We're oldies. We'll be gone when this gets really bad. But kids' lives and their kids' lives.
Well, when I hear Guterres, I think he's indulging in the same kind of game that Matt Hancock was over COVID, saying we want to frighten the pants off people. I think the idea is if they frighten us, they think we'll act more. But I think it's counterproductive, because if you tell people that we're all going to die, and according to one poll, about 56% of 16 to 24-year-olds now think mankind is doomed, whatever we do, well, you encourage inaction, because you know, if we're all doomed, what's the point of doing anything? Yeah,
it's an interesting point. We'll get on to more on that in just a moment. Joycelyn, I want to talk about the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, what he tweeted this week. He said, we are making our planet uninhabitable, and he called for the end of this relentless and senseless war on nature. And that point that Ross makes, actually, if you don't have any hope, how are we getting people on side with that sort of language? People just sort of give up when you hear that stuff, don't you?
Yeah, I think the language is really important, and I think there's a difference between telling the truth and of driving people into apathy and inaction. And I love this quote from Donella Meadows, which says, there's too much bad news for complacency, but there's too much good news for despair. And I think that language that is inspiring doom really ignores how much each individual can do, not just in terms of recycling, but in terms of coming together, coming in solidarity with different communities and holding governments and fossil fuel companies and big corporates to account, and having a power to make a change in local communities. I think whilst we need to tell people the truth, and the climate crisis isn't just something of the future, it's happening now, and it has been happening to the most vulnerable and least responsible for years and years.
But if everybody thinks it's fine, then no
exactly.
One will do anything.
So that's the point. I think there's a balance between the reality of the situation, which is stark, but the need for hope, which the IPCC report did include as well. It said if all of the mainstream actions were taken, we won't only kind of miss out on the bad effects, but we'll actually benefit and have a better life.
Yeah. Jason, there are lots of people who are at home who just think, well, climate change isn't going to affect me in my lifetime, or it's not going to affect me in my geographical area. My country's not going to be affected because it'll be the Seychelles that's going to be flooded before it, affects me in Britain. How do we get those people to start to do something? I mean, Joycelyn touched on what she thought. We need hard words, don't we? We need to tell the truth. It's patronising not to.
Of course we need to tell the truth, but I agree entirely with Ross. This kind of alarmist rhetoric is completely counterproductive, and there is so much good news in this exact report that you can look for if you actually want to see it. The one that stood out for me was that 18 countries now have managed to decouple economic growth from emissions, meaning they're able to grow the economy, everyone gets richer without creating more greenhouse gases. When you go back to, the days of Thomas Malthus and in the 60s and 70s and 80s, people have been making these doomsday predictions for so long. They always put a time frame on it, 10, 15, 20 years to save humanity. None of it ever comes true. Of course, climate change is real, but innovation is greater than climate change. Humanity...
comparing people who are saying climate change is a danger to humanity to those people in the Middle Ages who were saying all sorts of stuff, that's a bit...
The prediction that Malthus made, which is still, quite, I think, commonplace in what we see environmental rhetoric, was to do with food production. He was predicting that as the population of the world went up, we wouldn't be able to produce enough food. Of course, that's not happened. We've had fewer people in starvation than ever before, and now we've got lab-grown meat, we've got genetically modified crops. In exactly the same way, we've got carbon sequestration, literally taking carbon dioxide out of the air. Humanity has never created a problem that we can't solve.
And Joycelyn, I sort of see you behind Jason there, sort of grinning. I'm not sure, it's not in agreement, but I sort of think about that. That's a good point, isn't it? Or do you sort of think, well, we're just kicking the can down the road?
I think that whilst we might have moved out of the era of climate denialism, we are in the era of climate delay. And the IPCC report this year is saying that this is our last kind of call, this is our last chance. And the reason they put timelines on them, which aren't always true, because as I said, people have been already experiencing the harshest effects of the climate crisis. We do need to act now, and we need to act quickly. And there are many different pathways we can go on. And each of them, the more we act, the less impactful they will be.
Quite right about, you say the IPCC saying it's our final chance. The IPCC does not say that. It's not in the report. Guterres didn't even say it. That quote actually came from a spokesman from Greenpeace, but it was sort of reported as if it was in the IPCC report, in a Guardian headline. And it's exactly the kind of sort of stuff which...
They agreed.
It does make it clear that if we've got sort of 5 years to try and keep to 1.5, and it's a very, very clear document with excellent summaries, and it makes it plain that if we exceed 1.5, the damage in terms of cold, actually, as well as heat, and the areas that won't be able to produce food will get more and more extreme. So I want to agree with you, because I believe in human ingenuity, and I also believe in action. I think my greatest climate action was taking teenagers to plant trees this year. But the point is, and your words, climate delay, is so well spoken, we must get on with it, and we must motivate every sector of society now.
Well, let's talk about action, because you attend protests, don't you? Do they work? And I'm thinking of, people on, blocking roads, but also other stuff, going to newspaper and throwing paint on the reception walls or whatever.
Yeah. I don't throw paint on
No,
on
sorry,
walls,
I wasn't associating...
And I think also one needs to be very careful with any protest that it doesn't alienate people. But I was with some of the school pupils demonstrations that they've put climate in the front line of an electoral issue. And that has been extremely important. So there's that kind of protest, but there's also the protest
Just to say, that
of
protest that we're seeing there is Extinction Rebellion protesters vandalising the offices of a newspaper for not doing enough to make people aware of the scale of protest, of the problem. Carry on, sorry, I just seeing the pictures there.
I think, like I said, I think one has to be very cautious that protest is peaceful, is positive, but I think the best protests are the way we mobilise people all around the country. It's so inspiring what local groups do. Planting, caring for the local wildlife, noticing introducing more and more recycling, but also creative actions. And I wish this government would inspire that from the top down, just as people are inspiring it from the bottom up.
But what about the protests that disrupt people's lives, normal people's lives? Do they work?
I think there's a real danger that they simply alienate people, and their organisers have to be very careful as to think through what they're doing.
And then thinking through logically, language that we're talking about, which is what we're having this debate about, that encourages that sort of protest, doesn't it? Because people feel that they've got to do something.
Yeah, I think the got to do needs to be directed into positives. And that's the task of leaders, be it in faiths, be it in environment, be it political leaders, be it business leaders, to take that energy and turn it into the can-dos that you've been talking about.
Ros, I mean, this isn't black and white, is it? Do you, when you listen to Jonathan there, do you sort of hear stuff that you think, actually, I agree with that? I can take bits.
Well, I'm all in favour of people doing positive things, planting trees, and so no, I've got anything against that. You know, I accept the climate is warming, and it's something we've got to do something about. But what I pick up about young people is we've got a generation who are traumatised. They've been sort of brought up on this thing, the world's going to end, and you know, we're all going to die. There's no point in having children because they'll be brought up in an uninhabitable earth and so on. And I think that's absolutely dreadful. And you know, people have to understand, I mean, you talk about climate delay. That seems to me to be a byword for actually making sure that we've got an economy as well as environmental measures, because, you know, we can cut carbon emissions to zero tomorrow if we want, but we wouldn't have an economy, and we'd have far more people starving and far more people in trouble. You know, we've got to balance the two things.
Are you traumatised, Justin? You look like...
I'm not traumatised, and as a young person and someone who's worked with a lot of young people, I'm actually so inspired every day by their enthusiasm, their ingenuity, their creativity. And the young people that I've worked with, yes, are worried and are anxious, but they use that anxiety to power them into action rather than sitting back. And of course, we all have our times of hopelessness, but I think that young people are actually super creative and are working better than generations before. I'll just say that. And so I think that delay isn't about... I don't agree that if we cut emissions tomorrow, we won't have an economy. I think that the younger generations are coming to this problem, understanding the root is in our economy. Our root is an oppression of certain communities, and trying to change those systems, using this as an opportunity for transformation rather than as one of helplessness.
Jason, do you feel positive about the future for our children? And our
I feel extremely positive. There's a very strange mismatch here between the rhetoric. On the one hand, the world's about to end, and on the other hand, we can solve it by, you know, growing some tomato plants or something. That's all lovely, but it doesn't really match up at all. I worry that climate delay is, as Russ was saying, a byword for all kinds of damaging limits on the economy. If we really want to do something about emissions, let's do things like investing in nuclear energy. Let's really do some big picture stuff that is going to make an impact, rather than trying to shift the burden onto individual people who just want to live their lives.
Yeah, well, we're talking about climate change and whether we're out of time or not. We are out of time in the debate, so it's really good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. And some interesting views in the studio, Holly.
Yeah, as you can imagine, it's incited a few interesting reactions at home. Loads of you getting in touch on this today.